Troubled to see this indictment move forward. The former president, like every other American, is entitled to a presumption of innocence.
These are serious charges that merit serious consideration by the public.
What we've seen over the last several years is the weaponization of the Department of Justice. And the facts that are laid out here are damning in terms of Donald Trump's conduct.
Further reaction there from some of the other Republican candidates for president. Joined now on our roundtable, Adonis Brazil, former New York Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin, the executive editor of the AP, Julie Pace, and the New York Times reporter who owns the Trump beat, Maggie Haberman, author of the #1 bestseller, Confidence Man. And Maggie, let me begin with you. You've covered Donald Trump for a long time, and as you read through these 49 pages of the indictment, vintage Donald Trump.
That was what I was thinking as you started talking. I mean, it is him distilled to a T. It's all aspects of his personality, thinking that he can talk his way out of everything, thinking that things are, and again, these are allegations. He is entitled to a presumption of innocence, but these are based on insider accounts, his lawyer, an audio recording of him, and it's him boasting. It is him having a disregard for certain rules. It is him believing he can talk his way out of almost anything, and I think that it is one of the most devastating indictments that I have ever read.
And you addressed this in the New York Times this week. One of the big mysteries of all this is why Donald Trump would want to keep all these documents.
And that's not addressed, and doesn't have to be legally in the indictment, but it is going to be an enduring question. It may be one that prosecutors try to deal with at trial. There's obviously been a range of questions about this. Trump views everything as leverage. Was he in some way trying to monetize it? We know that prosecutors went down the road of was he trying to use this for business deals. None of that is there. Chris Christie said on this set, I think 7 months ago, that he believed part of this was about Trump's inability to accept that he wasn't president anymore.
Lee, let me give you the chance to do what Lindsey Graham really didn't want to do, and that is actually defend Donald Trump's behavior here rather than simply attacking the prosecution.
Well, I'm someone who doesn't believe that federal criminal charges should have been brought forth. What's interesting about the poll that you just released is that you see 48-35 people believe that charges should be brought, and then 47-37 saying that this is a politically motivated indictment. It really shows where America is right now. And there are people, and I believe as far as process goes, when you see all of the issues related to classified documents with President Trump, President Biden, Vice President Pence, regardless of trying to compare it apples to apples, apples to oranges, putting that aside, clearly there's something that needs to be improved on the process, because this keeps on happening.
The reason you can't put it aside is because they're different cases. Both Mike Pence and President Biden turned over the documents. They didn't refuse to return the documents after a subpoena came in. So I'll just ask you the question again. Based on the indictment, are you comfortable with the idea of Donald Trump being president? Can you defend the behavior outlined in that indictment?
So again, I'll tell you that I don't believe that federal criminal charges should be brought in this case.
Why not?
I don't believe that he committed a crime. The Presidential Records Act is not a criminal statute.
It's not what he's being charged on.
Right, so then you are launching a criminal investigation on something that isn't criminal. And when you analyze the Presidential Records Act, it really gets to the retention of documents. Now, was President Trump out there destroying the documents? Because that would be a different dynamic when you read the context of the Presidential Records Act.
We don't know that he didn't destroy them, but we do know that
that's not what's being charged. And now you have a case that goes before a judge, and potentially you'll get appealed based on how legal decisions get brought. That as you go through the process, there might be a different interpretation, because the Presidential Records Act, for example, is silent on a timeline. So if the President of the United States outgoing has a requirement to retain the document, they're not destroying the document, but is retaining the document, at what point is that former president required to turn it over?
Just to be clear, and I want to go down here, you have no problem with the president refusing to return the documents after a subpoena. You have no problem with the president concealing the documents. You have no problem with the president moving the documents. You have no problem with the president sharing secret information with people who aren't authorized to see it. You have no problem with any of that.
None of which I've said.
Well, you said that.
I don't believe that federal criminal charges should be brought in this case. And if you're going to bring federal criminal charges, again, and maybe Senator Graham has a very different way of articulating it in his interview with you, but there are not equal scales of justice. Okay, there are Americans who are out there who, across this country, believe that this isn't about saying that no one's above the law. It's about because President Trump is running for office, that he should be the target of a politically motivated indictment. That's in your poll. I mean, the respondents saying
I'm asking
that they believe that
you're
charges should be brought, and they believe that
you're responding with the poll, and that's what I'm trying to get
No,
around.
but that gets to the heart of where America is right now. There's a part of America who believes that President Trump should get targeted with a politically motivated indictment, and there's a segment of America who says that he should not. And as far as supporting him for President of the United States next year, there are Americans who are deciding who they want as their next President of the United States based off of the economy and inflation, the border, drugs, foreign policy, the list goes on. The average independent-minded, undecided voter who is out there in September, October of 2024, they are going to be deciding their vote based on the issues that matter most to them and their family and the future of this country. And I think for a lot of Americans, they're going to make their decision based on stuff other than this case.
Donna?
Well, let me just say thank you, Lindsey Graham, for putting some Tabasco in my coffee. I'm going to have an extra bit of Tabasco because you know what? The Republicans are willing to wage war on the bedrock, on the principles that founded this nation, a government of laws, the rule of law. And what surprised me in reading this indictment, and you have to sit and read it, is that the president knew what he was doing. He knew when he commanded or directed his aide to bring the boxes to him, to take the boxes away. Or he played a game of hide and seek. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand what the president was trying to do, the former president. He was trying to retain these documents after he was subpoenaed, and he delayed. So where are we now? We're going to play a game of politics, of course. We're going to talk about Hillary Clinton. We're going to talk about that. And I was chair of the party, so this is part of the reason why this hair is so beautifully gray, is that Comey came after Clinton, came after former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. A month before the campaign, this is what the Clinton campaign had to deal with. This is what we had to deal with. And 2 days later, it was announced that, oh, we're not going to bring any charges. So bring them all up. Joe Biden wasn't playing hide and seek with documents. Mike Pence wasn't playing hide and seek with documents. No one was playing hide and seek but Donald Trump.
Julie Pace, it appears right now that Donald Trump has decided that his best legal strategy is a political strategy, that the best way to avoid political consequences is to run and win the White House again.
Absolutely, and if you look at his history, it's no surprise that he would take this approach because it's what's worked for him in the past, even as recently as we saw with Rick, even as recently as the case in New York. I do think, though, that there are some differences in this case versus in the New York case, and I think part of it does come down to his own conduct. I think it was much easier, and we saw this after the charges in New York were released, it was much easier for Republicans to both argue that that was politically motivated and actually to defend his behavior. They might not have liked it, but it didn't feel as legally egregious. In this case, it has been challenging to find Republicans who will outright defend his behavior here. That's why everything is pointing toward the process, everything is pointing toward political motivation in the charges, but it's becoming very difficult for them to defend his actions because of how central he is, his words, his actions are to these charges.
Maggie, Donald Trump not the only person indicted on Friday. Walt Nauta, his personal assistant, was his valet, naval valet in the White House. What do we know about him, and how do you explain why he was willing to go down this road with President Trump?
I think that you have to look at Walt Nauta differently than we have seen other people who have ended up on the wrong side of prosecutors alongside Donald Trump. This is the first time Trump himself has been charged in a case like this. In the Trump Organization case in Manhattan, he was not charged. When
Alan Weisselberg
was. When Michael Cohen was charged and Trump was president, Michael Cohen got charged, Trump was not. This is a different incident. Walt Nauta is a military veteran. He was in the Navy. He worked as a White House valet. He became close to Trump, but you have to remember that somebody who has a military background is going to view the commander-in-chief differently. And so I think that Walt Nauta, who has been described to me and my colleagues as, not political, not having some kind of side game, as many Trump aides are accused of doing, I think he really just felt like he was supposed to do what he was told.
And willing to risk going to jail.
Well, I think we're going to see whether that happens, right? I think there's an open question as to whether prosecutors are now going to try to pressure him to accept a plea deal and cooperate. But I do think that Walt Nauta is a case study in what happens to people who are loyal to Trump, and we have seen that over and over.
Lee Zeldin, let's go back to the politics now on all this. You were addressing that in your first answer, but for Republican voters, when they're looking at Donald Trump versus all the other candidates, what about this idea that there might be, as the Republican primary campaign goes on, Trump fatigue? They might have liked Donald Trump, might have liked what he did as president, but worried that he's bringing too much baggage to the general election.
At this point, the fact that he keeps going up in the polls as this stuff is happening, I think a lot of that is baked in. I mean, if you're going to be tired of who President Trump is or how he speaks or how he acts, and this isn't 2015 or 2016. It's now been a long time. People know who he is. They know what they get. And I mean, I thought when the Bragg indictment came out that President Trump's candidacy was going to get launched into a different stratosphere as far as the Republican primary, and that's exactly what happened. What's going to happen here? I mean, in your poll, you're showing across all voter registrations. Imagine what that number looks like of whether or not you think this is politically motivated. If that was just Republicans, Republican primary voters, it's possible that coming out of this, he ends up being even more popular with the Republican primary base, but we'll see.
But now,
and I think what Trump is trying to do is, he said this last night at his rally, he's trying to make himself a proxy for his voters,
Yes.
saying, they're coming after me because they want to come after you. And that has proven to be a very powerful message to a lot of Republicans. I do think, to the congressman's point earlier, though, one of the questions will be for Americans who have been dealing with inflation, who have been watching this very unshaky or uncertain economy, how much do they actually wish they were hearing about some of those issues from Republicans? Right now, the campaign is completely centered around Trump and his legal issues.
Donna, concerning a lot of Democrats, the fact that with all this going on, Joe Biden is not soundly defeating Donald Trump in the polls.
Well, look, it's still early, and Joe Biden's weaknesses in terms of where he's standing right now is among some of the Democratic base, the young voters. On June 17th, he will launch his official campaign in the great city of Philadelphia, and I believe in the long run, those voters will come back home. But back to the Republican field, because as you well know, several people entered the race this week, and nobody heard about them, including the governor from North Dakota, because Donald Trump dominates the news cycle. He dominates the political field. And I don't see how anybody can get to his left or his right or even go down the middle as long as Donald Trump is in the news.
Thank you all very much. That's all we have time for today. We'll be right back.